To have the insight of Thomas Mellin's with respect to this historical perspective, the statistical substance that Evan brings, and the absolute bulldog advocacy that Jeffrey really has the monopoly on, I think that perhaps some change could be effected. I don't know where to begin in terms of a question. I think one of the themes to me throughout this is really sort of the tangle of ownership of these properties. So how one navigates sort of the shoals of being a tenant of perhaps a city agency like NYCHA, or dealing with, as an outside entity, advocating for the preservation of backyard urban space, or as Jeff was so explicitly giving us examples of, real suburban open space that's being compromised as we walk and live and breathe. So I would just want to, well, let me put this to Evan, actually. Evan, in your advocacy with respect to public policy, are you generally finding buy-in among row house owners, or have you had a lot of conversations with them?
Yes. I mean, we didn't have time to get into it, but the DEP and the city are putting forth really good what's called green infrastructure plan. That means everything that is not tunnels and pipes, that just soil, trying to bring it back to the way it was. But where I don't get the buy-in and the support is the small parcels of open space. In other words, if it's 5,000 square feet, the new regulations that are proposed are really good. Where my problem is that they should apply to small areas too, and I think that most row house owners that I know, or people who live in row houses, tenants, like the idea. They just don't think about it. That's why the dog with the glasses. They just think, oh, pave it, and it will be easier to maintain. But then when you show pictures of what it could look like, mirrors to make the space look bigger, and lattice work and different shrubbery, and people say, wow. And but it does have to be affordable. It has to be doable. It can't be rocket science. It can't be $100,000 landscaping project. It has to be, doable.
Right.
So yes, I think most row house owners are more than open to it.
I also had a question for Tom about the public housing. If in your research you've done census research, and just to understand whether many of those residents were long-term residents, and I'm thinking specifically about Amsterdam houses, which recently, I know Landmark West, maybe a little longer than recently, had worked with this particular public housing community to really educate them about the historical significance and the design significance of their housing. So I was just wondering, in that case, it seems like there really was an investment of those owners for their building and their landscape.
Yeah, well, that raises all sorts of interesting questions and points. I think that public housing is a unknown story to many New Yorkers, and the success of public housing in New York is an unknown story. People don't recognize that while there are certainly developments within the NYCHA system that have significant problems, that by and large, unlike the public housing initiatives of other cities, New York has been very successful. There are long waiting lists to live in public housing today. They are very stable communities by and large, and I think I'm answering some of the questions.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things that I find myself thinking about, having listened to the other presentations, is what ultimately is the goal of a lot of these initiatives, and what ultimately is the role of education. It seems to me that the role of education in all sorts of, that education is a priority in all sorts of realms that we're talking about, that people simply don't understand the implications of paving over their backyard, that people don't know the history of their own city, they don't know what has succeeded, they don't know what hasn't, they don't know the names of landscape designers, they don't know the contributions that Robert Moses made. There's all sorts of things, and perhaps the negative contributions of Robert Moses are somewhat more well known because of Caro's book, but there's all sorts of voids in our understanding of our city and our and all sorts of urban issues. And I think that while the 20th century is full of, or history altogether, is full of evidence that education doesn't make you a better person, and that you can be really educated and be a terrible person and do terrible things. No, I'm serious. That I actually think that educating is, I believe that it's valuable. I believe, you mentioned that I had just done the show at the New York Public Library. The New York Public Library is a remarkable institution that is founded on the idea that democracy works when people are informed, and people are informed when they have free access to information. So they collect everything, and they are dedicated to making it accessible. And I think that all this information needs to be accessible. Once it's accessible, and once you've raised the level of education, I'm very reluctant to become the design police. I'm very reluctant to think, we have the answers, and you should do this, and you shouldn't do that. And while I just think it raises, I think the presentations raise thorny, complicated issues.
No doubt.
But on the ownership issue and the education issue, in Douglaston, you began with 2/3 of the homeowners saying, yes, we want to be protected, we want the regulations. In Sunnyside Gardens, you started with 2/3 and it got up to consistently 3/4. You don't have, in Broadway Flushing, that neighborhood in north of Flushing, you have the homeowners association and the overwhelming number of homeowners who want this protection. They want some protection because right now they are at the mercy of, maybe not zoning anymore, but they're at the mercy of unsympathetic development. And they feel, if you want to be crass about it, their property values for their property as a home go down as this happens, but their property values as property go up by permitting this kind of monstrosity. So it's not a question. In 25 years ago, especially in Queens, I would have said, you have to really work hard to convince people that they want preservation. And now you've still got to convince elected officials, and you really have to convince the Landmarks Commission, and a lot of times you can't. It's not like what Charles said last night about we have to work for this, and we have to acknowledge this, and we have to, I remember we fought, mentioned, testified, written for a lot of those things, and it just bounced off the heads of the Landmarks Commission.
Yeah, that's a very tough nut to crack. And that's a really oversimplification of the way of putting it. I would like to open it up to the floor for questions. Yes, gentlemen? Oh. Where? He's in the second section in the front row. You want to raise your hand again?
Someone raise your hand?
Yeah. Keep going. All right, fine. Okay.
Jeffrey, most suburban communities have architectural review boards, which the size of the city doesn't permit at the present time. Is it possible, or is it conceivable or desirable to have more local control over that aspect of development, since zoning is so crude and can't really deal with the kinds of issues that you're talking about?
I think the zoning change in the Cord Meyer development in Forest Hills was terrific. That's probably the best that you're going to get. What's interesting is when they were rezoning Queens Boulevard, and this was a year and a half ago, they're rezoning Queens Boulevard. The testimony at the community board from a lot of people was, can you make it look better? Can you like put some design guidelines? They want some kind of quality design. They don't want the junk that can go up. And they're afraid that that's what they're going to get. And so I don't know that that's a good idea, having a design review board in local places. Forest Hills Gardens has it, and they work very well with it. But I will say that a lot of people in the city want it. They may not want landmark designation, but they don't want the Wild West either.
Thank you very much. I'm a lover of public housing, and I was bowled over when I came to live in this country by how beautiful, it's not really public housing, but Stuyvesant Town is, and how beautiful Peter Kruger Village is. The buildings are beautiful, they're austere, the brick walls are beautiful. And I think that to sort of and if you get pictures of those spaces, those open spaces now, they're lush with trees, they're just a paradise. And so I think that when we look at those spaces, when they don't work, a lot of it is because of neglect. So it's partly education of people who live in them, but it's also partly the kind of neglect that Alexander was talking about, which is thoughtless, kind of ill-informed modifications like, fences in public housing and inappropriate paving. And all of a sudden, the place dies by 1,000 cuts. It's just
a systematic chipping away. Right.
It's a sort of chipping away that's kind of thoughtless. And so, when you talk about education, with which I completely agree, there are a lot of dimensions to this education effort. The residents can be educated, but then the owners maybe not, or the neighbors. So you're right, you're 100% right. I'm at a loss for suggestions on how to, this is part of an education effort. We're doing our bit, but I'm at a loss for a large-scale education effort without the help of the press, in which consistently preservation is painted as, in the way of progress, in the way of development, in the way of saving people money, in the way of property rights. So the press is not helpful. Where can we get help? So where can we get help? That's the question. Sorry, it was a long preamble, but that's the question.
I think just to add to that, what was so refreshing to me about Evan's presentation was this idea of quantification, and so much of this has to be making a defensible argument, and I think numbers speak so loud to public policy officials, and I think that's why you're getting the traction you're getting, because you've got numbers to back things up.
I think it also brings to mind the term highest and best use, which is I think it's a real estate term, which is basically is the more you build, the more money you can get for it. But when you look at the environmental toll that, say, parking lots or when you overbuild and you just put down concrete, you're not counting a lot of that embodied energy. You're not counting a lot of the invisible. We're talking about the invisible landscape architect, but there's an invisible cost that's just not in the formula. So that's why I sort of turned in this route.
Well, also interesting, just Tom, when you were talking about the various iterations of landscapes within public housing complexes, and it looked that there was sort of a start that was green, maybe perhaps formal, and then maybe it became more hardscape, and then it's brought back to, well, this very dramatic example of the rolling hills in Co-op City. That was fascinating.
Right. Well, it is interesting, I think, to see how these spaces have evolved. I think that the work that you're doing, Evan, is so important, because I think that it is, as you were saying, really important to get the facts out there, that people simply don't know them, and then to have them interpreted as well, so that there are hidden costs and hidden benefits in those numbers, in those charts, that people aren't aware of. I think that that's really key. I'm reminded of Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan saying, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts. And so, and I think that that's just really important. You were saying to me, Evan, how it's very hard to get this kind of work funded. Well, I think that that's something that is part of the is part of the solution, or should be part of an effort, is to pressure government. It's not going to be easy. You know, the government we're living in a moment when the sense of a public good is to a large extent diminishing in front of our eyes, and it just is. And the sense that government can actually improve the quality of life is just something that is going into the ether. But nonetheless, to whatever extent we can lobby and pressure government to support the kind of studies that you're doing so that we do have the facts and we don't just have our opinions, I think is part of it.